Okay, let's give everybody a little while to turn up.
Yeah. So today's session, for those who haven't joined us before and are new to our session, we have Nazim Shah, who is our trustee at Ealing and Hounslow CVS. So I'd introduce him as such before. I also introduced him as a solicitor with Elizy. So he's our specialist advisor. And the session today, we'd be talking about staff handbook. So it's more to do with HR. Why is a staff handbook needed? What should be in that handbook? Should we be looking at some of the policies, any changes? What's the benefit of having a good and well drafted handbook? And Nazim usually takes question and answers at the end of the session. If you want to go ahead and put in your questions, even in the chat, if there's anything really, really confidential, we're able to take on a 15-minute slot at any time, not during this session, but off this session, and get advice from him. But apart from that, we're open to all kinds of questions at the session. So thank you for joining us today. We will wait for a few more minutes because we had around 22 people who have signed up for the session. So a few more minutes and I'll leave Nazim to decide on when he would like to begin.
Oh, not a problem. I'm just going to. Okay.
If everyone doesn't mind putting in their name and organization, either in the chat box or where you've put in your name at the under your image, or if your camera is off, just be easy to connect and network, as well as to speak with you at the session. And if you have any questions, do raise your hand, put your questions in the chat. And put yourself on mute unless you're talking.
If anybody has any questions whilst I'm talking, normally when I'm in the flow, I tend not to look around or notice hands being raised, but try putting it up in the chat. I've got the window open next to me, so hopefully I'll see if somebody's waving around for an answer to a specific question. If not, I'm sure Nyoka will unmute herself and let me know that I'm probably missing some important questions. If I go too fast or you want me to cover something again, please do let me know. Nyoka, did I give you a copy of the pages I've got open or no?
No, I don't have that. If you don't mind sending that to me, I'd be able to pass it on to our attendees post the session. I missed checking that with you prior to the session today.
Sure, I will hopefully do that. Actually, I'll do that now. It might be a better idea. I know I can be a little forgetful halfway through. So whilst I'm doing that and everybody's got their coffees, I will start in a few minutes. Is my screen sharing still on?
Yes.
So you can see everything I'm doing?
No, because I think you've selected a specific part of your screen share, so it is still at staff handbook.
Yes, I'm inadvertently competent for today. It's not the norm.
We will be putting in a link to the feedback for today's session. Thank you for your feedback at the last event. Do give us your feedback at the end of the session. It will help us tailor and improve our sessions to your requirements. and give us understanding of how the session went too.
I am now screen sharing again, I take it. You can see the screen sharing, can you guys?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, in which case, I'm not sure how many members we have now in the chat at 11. Should I give it another 5 minutes or should I start?
I think we can begin because we're recording the sessions. Whoever misses out can always come back to it.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join me talking about staff handbooks. And I think you're all probably wondering if you haven't had a bad experience on employment law matters, you're probably thinking, why a staff handbook? Well, a staff handbook is your way of communicating with your staff. And it's a way of communicating consistently with your staff and letting them know what they can expect from you and what you are expecting from them. It will tell your members of staff what your rules are regarding toil, regarding taking annual leave, all the rest of it. So if you have a new starter, you will generally help each other immensely by having a staff handbook and letting them know what the culture, the aims, the purpose, the values of your organization are, what you expect from them, and what they can expect from you. A staff handbook is generally quite a good snapshot of what an employer is like. So if there's an employer who's got lots of disciplinary policies, but not very much by way of benefits to the employer, the employee will be able to see and make up their own minds about how this employer is going to be treating them. So it's always important to have a handbook. And you might be thinking, oh, it's just a bunch of policies. It's a bit more than that, and it can land you in lots of hot water if you don't actually have a well thought out staff handbook. Now, if you can put in the chat, if you're all listening, if you don't want to speak, but do all of your organizations have a staff handbook, one that's been updated or revised recently? Because if not, you might want to have some words with the person responsible. I can see a few yeses, and that's reassuring. Excellent. Okay. Now, excellent. There isn't any legal requirement to have a staff handbook, but it's very good practice to have one, simply because if you ever find yourself in the unfortunate situation where somebody's taking you to an employment tribunal, you can rely on policies if you have them to justify your decisions. I'll come to that in a bit more detail, but I mean, we've in our successive talks, we will be talking about unfair dismissal, discrimination, equal opportunities, and this is where having a staff handbook with the right policies is extremely important, because if you're taken to a tribunal and because you've dismissed someone or because you've exercised a policy in a certain way and you don't have that written policy, you're on the back foot. The tribunal will want to see why you acted in certain ways and why you took a certain path. If you don't have a policy dictating how you carry out any procedure, it's going to be very difficult to show that you're acting consistently and that this is the kind of action you take in similar circumstances. That could go to the fairness of a decision, and it can go towards fair treatment as well. So although not a legal requirement, it makes a lot of sense to have a staff handbook. And if people were present in the previous talks, I mentioned that having a grievance and disciplinary policy is a requirement, as is some of the other details, and it's a requirement to actually pass that on to your employee within 2 months of their starting employment. Now, if you have a staff handbook, you can just pass them a copy and you've got everything that you need to in one place. You can give this to them and you've complied with your legal obligation. You don't necessarily want it in your employment contract, because then if you don't follow your disciplinary or grievance policy, it's a breach of contract, and that can give rise to a wrongful dismissal claim or a constructive dismissal claim, as well as a breach of policy. I think someone's mic is on. I can hear someone. I'm not sure if you're trying to ask a question or not to worry. Okay. So yes, a staff handbook is a very useful starting point for employers and employees, and it sets the, shall we say, the tone of the employment conversation moving forward. So, okay, what to include in a staff handbook, and please do tell me if I'm going over grounds that you have already covered or you know of. But generally, a staff handbook can be split into 3 main parts. The first one is the introduction, and this is where you put down your aims and general rules, purpose, equal opportunities, terms of employment, your working shift patterns, days, hours, any food and drink policy, visitors at work policy, office guidelines, dress code, whatever you really want can go in there that you want your employees to be aware of. Now, not all of these policies will be relevant to all organizations. You probably won't have a policy on shift work if you're only operating between the hours of 9 to 5, because that'll be the same time for everyone. A food and drinks policy, generally, yes, you might want to stipulate when lunch breaks are taken, whether you don't want people eating pickled herrings or anything at your desk at lunchtime, just for the sake of colleagues, or whether you're going to allow certain beverages on site. You might have a zero tolerance to alcohol policy where no alcohol is allowed onto the premises, or you might be a little relaxed about it and allow it on premises. So that's something there. You might want something along your dress code, whether you have a uniform, whether it's smart casual, whether it's because of health and safety, you don't want baggy clothes. All of that can be put into these policies, so your employees know exactly what is being expected, and they can't accuse you of being unclear or woolly or not having told them that they have to act in a certain way. Then we have the HR policies, and that's the second part that a staff handbook can be divided. This is generally where you should have your probationary periods. So if you have a policy that employment is subject to passing probation in the first 3 months, 6 months, 1 month, 12 months, whatever it is, this is where to have that policy. Simply because if you have probation as a requirement, but you only apply it to some people, I could potentially envisage claims for discrimination or unfair treatment. So if there's a policy that applies to everyone, this is where it will be. You also have your absence reporting, your leave procedures, and then you have what would generally be called data protection. So your electronic communications and email usage, phone usage if you have work phones, You've also got your social media policy. Now, in this day and age where everybody's on Facebook, Instagram, well, I say everybody, but I'm not on Instagram. So, okay. But you have people on Facebook, there's WhatsApp, there's yeah, social media sites, LinkedIn. This is a useful tool to have if you want to protect your organization's image and you want to control the sort of content people who identify as your employees are putting out. So if you have an employee who in their own time makes certain remarks and there is no policy to regulate that, or they use either the organization's website or email to send out views or opinions which are at odds with your aims and your policies, with your aims, unless you have a policy covering that, you'll be hard pressed to try and hold them to account for it. Patricia, yes, I will be passing a copy of this presentation to New York at the end, and hopefully she'll send that to everyone. But yes, so these policies are important because, say for example, you're on holiday and say you're in Spain or Portugal and you say something and it's really extreme and out there. If it is objectionable content, unless you have a social media policy, you can't really do anything about it. But if you have a social media policy saying that our employees, if they are identifiable as our employees on social media, so if somebody's put their workplace down on Facebook and they make a comment which is discriminatory or illegal, then you can take action. And you can discipline them or sanction them in a proportionate manner. So yes, another thing I know which everybody in here loves is health and safety, and this is where your health and safety and your whistleblowing policies should go. So what employees can expect and what procedures are in place, how to report things. You also have your information technology policy, security of emails, basically, and other communications. Another one which might be interesting is expenses. What are your expenses policies? How do people claim expenses? For what period? I mean, I knew of a situation where somebody claimed expenses for 18 months and nearly bankrupt an organization because they didn't have a policy saying you can only claim expenses for the previous month, anything over that, and you lose it. So you can actually have those policies in place. And then if somebody falls foul of them, tough, they knew it. It was there in black and white. But if you don't have it, you're going to struggle to try and say, well, hang on, we don't have enough cash to pay this person £17,000 because they decided to fly to Australia to do a presentation. I mean, I'd love to be able to do that, but unfortunately I can't. But yes, so these policies are important in defining and in some aspects restricting activity which otherwise could cause you problems. This is also the place where you have your stress at work policy, any compassionate leave. As you know, under the Employment Rights Act, employees have the right for time off for dependents. They have the right to request flexible working, right for maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption leave. This is where you would have all of those policies which show your employees, firstly, that yes, you're a caring and compassionate employer and you recognize these rights. And secondly, that there are specific rules they need to follow if they want to exercise any of these rights. Another important one you might want to have is travel. So what are the rules on travel? I mean, what time is counted if somebody needs to travel to Birmingham for a conference? How would they recover expenses? It can go hand in hand with the expenses policy. What are your rules on the modes of transport? Can they fly to Birmingham? Do they have to get a coach? Can they drive down, or is it the cheapest alternative that there is, or should they use public transport if possible? All of those things can go in these policies and make it really, really clear. So, you know, if I was to go to one of my partners and say, I've just decided to fly down to Bristol from Heathrow because I had a client visit, they can turn around and say, well, actually, hang on, our travel policy says you can either drive down or you can catch a train or a coach. Either way, I'd be bound by what's written in there. Mind you, these days it's probably cheaper to fly than catch a train, but that's a different gripe altogether. Another thing which is important at the time is working from home policies. COVID has, in fact, accelerated the move to working from home. And it's important that when you're allowing staff to work from home, they know clearly in black and white what what's expected of them. And I think I'm getting some interference.
I'll mute it. I'll mute it right now.
Better, thank you. Yes, so working from home, who provides the equipment? Does the organization contribute towards either internet usage or electricity usage? Is there any kind of award or compensation for working from home? You know, who's responsible for maintaining the equipment? What happens if any of the equipment is damaged, or if the equipment is not fit for purpose? How do you raise IT concerns? How do you raise maintenance concerns? How do you report if something's gone wrong? All of that should be in the home working and IT policies, simply so that a lot of the aims with these policies is to think ahead to possible problems, unfortunately, and try and minimize the impact of those problems or devise strategies to deal with those problems before they occur. So it can be a bit abstract. You might find a policy with 15 pages talking about things which, you know, probably would never happen, but in case they do, you need it in there so people know what to expect. I know this doesn't happen very often, but there might be a policy on working conditions. If there's no heating or air conditioning, what is the temperature in the building before you allow staff to go home? I say that because I've had to work in places where that is an issue, but there should be a clear policy telling employees and employers what needs to be done. So yeah, and finally, whistleblowing. That should be a very, very important policy that's in there with all staff handbooks, simply because it can get you into a lot of problems as an employer, and you need to understand what whistleblowing is. I'm not going to cover it now. It's probably a session or two in itself, but basically, if your employee raises health and safety concerns or claims of illegality or fraud or mismanagement, anything that can be subject to criminal proceedings or any kind of action for a breach of rules or regulations. It's something you should take very, very seriously and get advice on, and follow your whistleblowing policy. It's surprising how many employers and organizations actually end up in a tribunal because they haven't followed a policy or their policy wasn't clear enough. So enough about that. I won't scare you. It's a Thursday evening, and let's try and talk about positive things. The third part would be the conduct, grievance, and disciplinary part of the policy of the staff handbook. This is where you'd have your sickness absence policy, not your sickness reporting, but your sickness absence. So how many sick periods can an employee have before they're brought up for a review? What is an acceptable amount of sickness absence? At what point does it become a capability issue? At what is long-term illness? Is there a requirement to speak to occupational health? What is the procedure for referring somebody to occupational health? Can you obtain medical records? What is the disciplinary procedure in case somebody is found to be taking too much time off sick, or has got into a fight, or there's an altercation at work, or they're causing a nuisance to other employees and to the organization itself? All of these policies should be in black and white, so that if somebody actually contravenes the policy, you know exactly what they have done and what your grounds are for taking action against them. The worst thing you can do is have a woolly definition, as I mean, if you said if the employee conducts any act which is against the values and principles of this employment of the organization, we can discipline them. That doesn't really mean anything. But if in the policy you have examples, if you commit acts such as theft, violence, fraud, criminal damage, these will be considered as acts of misconduct or gross misconduct, and you can be dismissed for them or sanctioned for them, and you set out what the sanctions are. That would help you significantly, because it's quite likely that even if you are acting correctly, the employer can face a situation where an employee will want to take them to tribunal. Not because the employer has done something wrong, but because the employee actually wants to challenge the decision. And if there's no clear defined policy, or the policy hasn't been followed properly, it certainly gives an employee the right to argue that procedurally the decision may be unfair, or that the employer hasn't acted reasonably or fairly in all the circumstances. And those are two words which should send shivers down the back of your spine, because they are the ones that can cause you a lot of grief. So yes, have a disciplinary policy or a capability procedure clearly set out, and then you have the grievance procedure, which also is extremely important, because this is the recourse that your employee has if they're not happy with the way things are being dealt. The grievance and disciplinary procedure, as said, are the ones that you need to hand out to your employee within the first 2 months of employment in any event. But say you didn't have a proper grievance procedure or a proper disciplinary procedure. When you go to a tribunal, not only will you be liable for the loss and damages that the employee is asking for, but they're entitled to ask for a 25% uplift because you failed to comply with ACAS codes on disciplinary and grievance, and you haven't provided the correct policies, or you haven't followed the proper steps. So if somebody is entitled to, I'm not going to give myself a difficult figure, but if somebody's entitled to £20,000 in damages, you can add another £5,000 on top, simply for not having the correct policies and not following the policies properly. So it can be quite expensive, and it certainly is a serious issue. This is also the place where you can have any restrictive covenants. So, you know, if your employee leaves you and they're in a position of trust, they can't approach your clients, your funders, your business partners, and compete against you. These are the sort of things you'd probably find in a non-compete clause, and something that you should actually have, either as part of the contract or as part of the staff handbook, which they then individually sign. So I think I'll enough about the actual policies. But once you have your policies in place, and most of you do, you have to make sure that you consistently apply them in all situations, because having a staff handbook is one thing, but if it's going to be either electronically kept in a folder or printed off and kept as a hard copy, but you don't refer to it, that's when you're going to start having problems. Because if you're not consistent, and you pick and choose when you want to apply policies, you can find yourselves in lots of legal hot water. So generally, I'll give an example. An employee doesn't accrue unfair dismissal rights until they've had 2 years of service. Okay, so you might think, okay, hang on, here's somebody who's only been here 9 months, and we're going to dismiss them without any procedure. Yeah, absolutely fine. As far as unfair dismissal is concerned, you're allowed to do that because they don't accrue the right until 2 years. But if they suddenly allege whistleblowing, or they allege that you've dismissed them because of their race, their gender, sexuality, it suddenly becomes a discrimination claim or a whistleblowing claim. And then the fact that you haven't followed a procedure or a policy in your staff handbook will not help you at all in a tribunal. A tribunal can look at that and think, well, actually, hang on, this employer has acted quite arbitrarily. They have a policy, but they've applied it to everybody else. What is the reason for not applying it to this claimant here? And the assumption that can be drawn is the reason it wasn't applied was because that individual was being discriminated against or being treated automatically unfairly. Because remember, for an automatic unfair dismissal claim, you don't need 2 years service. So if somebody's raised a complaint 3 months ago that, oh, I think so-and-so is stealing, or my manager's favoring one ethnicity over another, or either men or women, and they've made that complaint, and then 3 months later you decide to dismiss them and they link the two together, you've got a claim on your hands where you thought they couldn't take you to a tribunal. So it's important to be consistent, and it's important to apply the policies you have. Otherwise, the staff handbook can act to your detriment rather than as a support system for you, and that's probably going to be you know, the worst position you could ever want to be. But yes, don't adopt a handbook, a staff handbook, simply because it's there. You should actually look to have it tailored to your organization so it suits the purpose you want it for. It reflects your organization. It provides policies which are relevant to you. Because if you have a policy in the staff handbook which you don't ever intend to use, to like toil, you can work, you can receive a time and a half for every hour that you work over. If an employee actually ends up staying 2 hours, yeah, they can say, well, hang on, I want 3 hours back because it's in the policy. Why are you not applying it? And if you don't apply it, or you try taking it, try saying, oh, sorry, we didn't think it actually applied, that could give cause to serious problems and potential claims. So the aim of it all is to stave off possible claims and disputes rather than have something there which you don't use and becomes the cause of those disputes. I don't think there's much else I can actually say without going into individual policies, which I'm pretty sure nobody wants to go into. And I don't think I should be going into individual policies anyway. But if you have any questions, try and keep them anonymized so I'm not talking specifics, and I will try and answer them. Or if there's anything you want me to cover, either put it in the chat box or just give me a shout now.
Nazim?
Yes.
Lisa, hello.
Hi there.
With regards to the handbook, the staff handbook, is there a template that we can use with the various headings, or do we have to go to, or do we go to like services like yourselves and describe our business and etc., and then you come up with it and then obviously charge us? Is that how this works?
Yes, because these are HR policies. You can try using a template off the internet. There are policies available that you can try and, I won't use the word butcher, but you can try and amend and suit your purpose. But you need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, sure.
Because if you get it wrong, you're binding yourself and your employees. Yeah, and generally, because it does fall under support and advice. So either go to a HR specialist.
Sorry, say that again.
I said I wouldn't always recommend going to a HR company. Yeah. What you probably want is a solicitor. Not necessarily myself. I'm not trying to plug it in, but the benefits of going to a solicitor are, if you're going to discuss legal matters with the solicitor, either because you might have a potential claim coming up, or because you have a relationship, a professional relationship with a solicitor where they advise you, that can be covered by legal advice privilege, which wouldn't necessarily be so if it was a HR advisor or somebody doing it off the internet. So basically, it's whether you want that extra level of protection. And there's also the fact that if you go to a solicitor and they get the policy wrong, you have legal recourse against them. And generally, a solicitor's firm will put their hands up and say, look, we'll sort it out for you, kind of thing. And I mean, it probably sounds like a lot of work or very expensive, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. I mean, from experience, depending on the number of policies and how much work you actually want done, you can have a continuing relationship with a solicitor's firm without getting too, making it sound like a sales pitch. If somebody came to us and said, we want a staff handbook completely rewritten, and we thought it was going to cost them several £1,000s, what we'd say is, actually, hang on, set up a monthly retainer with us where you can come to us for any advice you want, and we'll provide the handbook as a part of that, and it'll probably be more cost effective for you. So those are kind of options you can discuss with any firm of solicitors. Again, there are HR providers out there as well who do the same thing, but you're not being dealt with by a firm of solicitors there. So that's something that if it's something that you're happy with, absolutely do so. If you're uncomfortable with that, then find a firm of solicitors. Just Google your local solicitors, or see if anyone can recommend anyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't ask me for recommendations, though. I know the firm I'm going to recommend. So yes, but yes, that's something you can definitely, you'd have to weigh up. So yes. Does the staff handbook cover employees and volunteers? Patricia, yes, it can do. If you have a volunteers policy in the staff handbook, it will cover them and their expenses and what's expected of them. They will not become employees by virtue of that, but and you have to be careful you don't end up paying them more than expenses and creating an employment relationship with them. But you can have a separate section on volunteer policies in the, it doesn't have to be the staff handbook. You can call it the office manual, part of the staff handbook, or you can call it the office manual simply and have a volunteer policy in there, and have that as the section for volunteers, and the remaining as the employee handbook within the office manual. So you cover that. It's absolutely fine to do that, but just don't mix it with employees, because they are completely separate statuses. So yeah, it is possible to cover volunteers and employees. Sorry, I give the long way round answers, so do stop me if I talk by the minute, talk by the word. So any other questions?
Yes, my name is Francisco. We have an organization that represents the Portuguese-speaking community in Hounslow.
Hi there, Francisco.
My question is the following: a contract of employment and a staff handbook.
Yes.
Because majority of the things you have covered here, you can put clauses on the contract of employment, and so I'm a little bit. I just wanted to have a little bit of a clear picture here
As to why. Okay. If you put something in your contract of employment, say that I'm entitled to work flexibly, I'm entitled to come in at 10 o'clock if I make up the hours after 5 o'clock, and then you decide you're not going to let me do that, that will be a breach of contract. It will give me the right to say that you have breached an express clause of the contract saying I can work 10 till 6 if I want to, and that will give me the right to claim constructive unfair dismissal or wrongful dismissal. It's the same with the disciplinary and grievance procedures. If you make them a part of the contract, and you don't follow the disciplinary or grievance procedures, which you might not want to for very good reasons, then not following them gives the employer a right to sue you for breach of contract. And in an employment tribunal, you can you can sue for breach of contract for up to £25,000. And if it's worth more than that, you can go to the civil courts or the High Court, and it can be a very expensive affair. So this is why you don't want these policies and these clauses in your employment contract, because you don't want the employee to sue you if you don't get something right. Say there's a flexible working policy which says an employer has the right to request for flexible working, and they make a request and you don't deal with it within, say, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or you decide to deny their request, they could potentially say, well, you've breached the contract, and that could be an expensive confusion. And the simpler way would be to keep it in a staff handbook, which doesn't form part of the contract. So the only time they can challenge it is on the grounds of fairness and procedure. So if they have 2 years, if they have 2 years service, and you do not allow them to take a certain entitlement under a policy, they could potentially try taking you to a tribunal, but it wouldn't be breach of contract, and it wouldn't necessarily be a dismissal. They could resign and say that you've breached the implied term of mutual trust and confidence, but that's not an easy claim either. So it safeguards your position as an employer to have this in a separate staff handbook rather than as part of a contract of employment.
Thank you very much. You clarified.
Does that clarify it adequately?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. We have lots of people, but not very many questions.
Yeah, just to say, if your income is below £30,000, you can join NCVO, the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, and they have quite a lot of HR resources, including template policies you can adapt.
Yes. Okay, that's helpful. I wouldn't know that. So thank you, Ian.
Sorry, Ian, below what? Annual
30,000. You're a
Okay.
community group and your income's below 30,000. You can be a member for free, and that gives you free access to a lot of their template policies.
I have added the staff handbook presentation to the chat window. Sorry, Nyoka, I think I'm having some problems with my email. I'm not sure if you received my email.
Yeah, I haven't checked the email because I've been focusing on the session, but
That's
I did
absolutely
see
fine.
the
Yes,
chat.
that's fine. Yes.
And I will resend that for those who are unable to go ahead and pull out that information. Just give me a second and I'll just double check if I've received that. Maybe yes, and Nazim, I have received an email from you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I've also put in a link to our feedback form. As I would always put it, it's really important to get that feedback. So won't take more than a couple of minutes to click on that link and give us your feedback for the session. Thank you. And thank you. This was a really, really interesting session, clear as always.
Thank you. If any of you have actual topics or areas that you want me to cover, which I haven't covered, or I might not be covering, put them in a suggestion and I can run other workshops. It's not an issue. I try and keep it under an hour. So, you absorb the information and it's not going into rule 7.1.9 of paragraph 79. So I try and present it in an easy to absorb format, simply because I know if I was listening to myself for over 40 minutes, I'd probably start dozing off. So thank you guys for not doing that. But yes, if you have any suggestions, do let us know. Let Nyoka know, and we can then arrange something on that topic.
Thank you, Nazim, for that. I will come back to you with suggestions that we've received. And also if there's any special questions that they have, which they'd like to personally discuss, do send me an email and we'll work out getting some time with Nazim.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Nyoka. Okay.
Thank you. For those organizations who've been running for a while and who don't have a staff handbook, this session would actually give them a kind of a outline of how to go about it.
Yes.
And the information that you provided, at least the areas of the topics to look at. So that'd be really useful. Thank you.
Yes, because the presentation sets out generally the type of policies you should have. There might not be the complete set of policies an organization needs, but definitely the type of policies you should have to be effective in managing your staff and your organization. So yeah, if anybody has any specific questions, do let me know. Just message me, email me, or ask Nyoka. And if you have any specific concerns, we can discuss them. But otherwise, I leave you to enjoy the rest of this strange evening. It's quite cloudy, but warm. And thank you, Patricia, Lisa, and everybody else. And thank you, Nyoka. Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you,
Thank you,
so much.
everybody. Have a nice evening.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.